Hello, everyone. Welcome. Everyone's just coming in, so I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to get started. Thank you for joining. Thank you very much for joining today. Super excited about our very first spicy take summer. We haven't done this before, so not quite sure how this is going to go. But should be a bunch of fun. So thank you very much for joining. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Put where you're connecting from, and hello, Gene. Thank you for starting it off. Um, Put where you're connecting from. Usually, we get a really good international group joining, so uh, yeah, should be a bunch of fun. We've just all been preparing for the spicy hot takes, so we're all ready to go. I just want to give everyone a minute to come in because we actually have quite a few people registered. So I just want to make sure that people don't miss anything. All right, everyone's joining. Lovely. Um, oh, we got France, we got Madrid, we got the US. Perfect. We got a whole bunch of people. This is great. Uh, so thank you heaps for joining. So the reason we wanted to do this is uh, not only to just have a little bit of fun, but I think in content design, sometimes we get used to the conversations sort of revolving around a few certain topics. And the idea is we just wanted to expand the range of conversation and see what takes people could come up with. So I truly think we have uh, five interesting takes today, to say the least. And I think we're gonna we'll get have some thought-provoking uh, um, thought-provoking takes. People just said right now that attendees can only chat with themselves. So let me just change that quickly. If I've just changed that, so you should now be able to chat and see everyone's chats. So I'm sorry about that. Um, so should be working now. If someone could give me a thumbs up to see that it's working now. Yeah, great. Awesome. Sorry about that. But now it's working. So perfect. All right. So we're gonna get in. Oh, Brittany, hello from Sweet Home, Alabama. I'm an Auburn boy, so uh you're my favorite person in this webinar so far. All right, so we're going to start. So the way this is going to work today, we're going to go through five different people who have their own spicy take. Now, I should say first before we get through, we are recording the webinar. So just letting you know, we are recording, and we will make that available afterwards. So, the way that this is going to work is you don't really have to do too much. You have to just sit back and enjoy the spicy hot takes that are coming your way. But one thing I will say is that during the presentations, we really want you to ask questions because at the end of each presentation, everyone's going to have to defend their take. So in the Q&A section, which you should have available to you, let me know if you're not seeing it, but in the Q&A section, feel free to ask questions, and you can also upvote questions from other people. So if you see a question that you agree with and you think is really good, upvote it, and the ones that have the most upvotes will be asked. So just keep an eye out for that. And then, of course, think carefully, consider what's being said. That's your job as well. And at the end, we're going to vote about who had the best take. And the obviously you can vote for whoever you want for whatever reason. But I would encourage you to think about not just the spicy level of the take, but also who was able to defend their take in the best way. So that's how it's going to work. So let's get started because we've got a lot to go through. So we're going to go through one by one. And the first take up today is from Francis Gordon, who is the principal content designer at Backbase. And Francis' take is that Figma is killing content design. Very controversial. Francis, I'm going to throw to you. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen and take us through why you think Figma is killing content design?
Okay. Can everybody see my screen properly? Whoops.
Yep,
We're
we
good.
can see.
Right. Figma has harmed and is harming and not helping content designers. And it's an anti-pattern. What's an anti-pattern? Well, it's just like a pattern, except instead of giving the solution, it gives something that looks superficially like a solution, but it isn't one. And that's a quote from someone smart in 1995. And it's a great definition. And as content designers, we know what anti-patterns are. So here's two of them, just to remind us what anti-patterns are. The first one is those like loads of content in a tooltip. And this one was actually pointed out by the FTC as really bad, deceptive content design and anti-pattern. And basically, we don't want to really tell people how much fees they pay. So we just put all the content, in a tooltip where nobody will find it, I think. And the one on the left is one of these wonderful consent boxes on privacy, where we give the yes, but we don't actually give the option to say no. And what happens with these is why they've become kind of accepted, is because everybody's kind of doing that. Why? And I want to go into that in a bit more detail. So why do we accept anti-patterns? Well, a bit of laziness. Mainly it's poor problem solving, so poor problem framing. So we kind of frame the problem such as nobody likes reading, right? We know as content designers that's a terrible problem framing, but that's the way it's framed. So it's kind of okay to hide all the content away because nobody likes reading. Then there's some cognitive bias that steps in, over optimism, because we all validate that with user testing, so everything seems great and everyone's doing it, right? So we think, well, we may as well do it. And as content designers, we often just sit back a little bit helpless, really, because everybody else is doing these anti-patterns. So what's this to do with Figma? Well, I think it's the exact same thing. It's an anti-pattern. We started off with really kind of framing our problem kind of in a weird way. We went, we can't make changes to designs directly. That was our problem. And then I remember, at some time about 3 years ago, maybe a bit more, we had all these memes, of all of us. We just wanted access to Figma. That was the kind of thing of the day. And I used to get so frustrated with these memes, because it just seems like of all the things to want access to a design tool. Anyway, our solution was access to the same tool as the designer will mean our contributions will be valued. We really kind of believe that. And then we had some proof. We got access and we were doing changes on these high fidelity files. The basic problem is we hadn't framed our problem properly, because our real problem was a complete misunderstanding of the value of words in UX, a confusion between content design and copywriting, and a lack of our own resources, sometimes up to 1 to 20 content designer ratio. I know I worked in a 1 to 60 content UXD ratio. And I know in some countries it's better, some it's worse, but usually we're not 1 to 1, right? So what happens, our undesirable outcome is UX designers are building deep knowledge and they're having this great relationship between product and engineering. And the content designers are like flitting around the edge over these multiple Figma files. And our work becomes even more low level. And because we got what we wanted, really, there's very little interest organizationally in actual content tooling. Figma string variables, right? Who else did lots of POCs of that? That's not a real content tool, sorry. So we didn't get any real gains in content maturity from this whole exercise. In fact, I think we did the opposite. What are our reasons? I don't think it's laziness. No one's really lazy. We framed that problem wrongly. We didn't look at what the real problem is. We just said the problem was we couldn't edit files. Then we kind of went, well, everybody else is raving around Figma, so shouldn't we? And I think there was this kind of spirit of everyone joining in and everyone jumping on this kind of, we all love Figma kind of bandwagon. I'm not sure that we just all sort of thought that was the right thing to do. And then I know I personally started feeling, well, quite helpless. Well, Figma kind of isn't my job, is to dash around 60 journeys on Figma files and sometimes put changes in the design system, but kind of in a very chaotic kind of way. And I wished for the old days of CMSs where we could control and govern content. So in summary, let's not confuse access to another discipline's tool to actual empowerment within content design. That's what happened with Figma. Figma's harming content design, and that's my spicy take.
All right, Francis, well done. That is a spicy take indeed to start off the day. My camera has changed over here, so I'm gonna move over here. I don't know why that's happened. Let me turn this off. That's a spicy mistake right there. So it's interesting. So we've asked people to submit questions if you have a question, but one person pointed out in the chat that they're not sure if they agree or disagree, but they're waiting to hear what a better alternative to Figma would be. So I guess the first question would be, if Figma's killing content design, what should we be doing instead?
Yeah, but I mean, there are content tools out there that are developed specifically to integrate with Figma, right? So there's Ditto Words, there's localization tools, which are really useful. But without doing those proof of concepts, because we're stuck in Figma, you're not going to know. But I do think that operationally, there are a lot of things. And I think some organizations are developing their own. So there are things we can do, but not when we spending all our time running around editing Figma files.
Okay. So Adina asks, is it fair to blame a tool for individual or process shortcomings?
Well, that's what I'm not doing. It's not the tool's fault. It's our fault for arguing for a tool and not arguing for our discipline. So it's not the tool's fault. This is completely, I think, the fault of the discipline, which seemed to just want access to files rather than to really step back and think what's best for our microcopy. How are we going to manage thousands and thousands of text strings and localize them to many, many different languages and contexts? I think that's the real thing we should have been grappling with, rather than access to a tool.
Interesting. All right. So I'll leave you with this question from Laurie. Laurie says, do you think Figma has benefited content designers for some of the design thinking parts of the process? So for instance, easier and equal access to workshop tools, prototypes, and so on.
I think so. I mean, I think there are some aspects like prototyping, I think, is one where if you want to do a quick tests or quickly show things, then I think that has its benefit, but that's a kind of a limited slice. The main problem though is Figma doesn't really in a real way let you govern your content, and without content governance and content management, it's very difficult to build true content maturity.
Yep. Fair
but
enough.
I do think there are benefits in slices of things, like prototyping is a great one.
Excellent. Okay, great. Francis, thank you for your hot take and for your good defense. We're gonna have to move on to get through everyone's now, but well done. Round of applause for Francis wherever you are. Great. All right. So we're gonna move on now to the next hot take. So that was Figma is killing content design, and now we are moving on to Bryan Kelly, a content design and strategy consultant. And Bryan's hot take is that accessibility is a flaw and not a ceiling. And he's going to take us through a few different reasons why we may be thinking about accessibility in the wrong, or at least a flawed way. So, Bryan, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Okay. Everybody can see the slide. Awesome. All right. So accessibility is a floor, not a ceiling, as Patrick mentioned. I'm looking through this from a certain lens, and that's that I'm really focusing on building an expertise around UX for older adults. And this is a mega trend that is happening right now that most organizations and executive leadership teams are not thinking about. And it started with some of the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, working with older populations. And around the same time, I ended up moving to the world's largest retirement community, which is an interesting story that I won't get into today. But it definitely shifted my perspective and got me thinking about things in a way that I hadn't before. So really, I'm spending my time trying to understand how older adults use tech and dispel many of the assumptions that I have had. And certainly, I think collectively as a group, we fall into these pitfalls. So, a couple of facts. This is something that is very fascinating when you dig into the research, and that's that 1 in 3 Americans are going to be over the age of 50 in just 5 years. At the same time, the fastest growing segment of tech users are those over the age of 50. And from a business perspective, these older adults, these older users control over 70% of the disposable income in the United States. So when we think about this, this is something that really has huge ramifications. And when we think about user experiences, we need to think about what is really going to best serve this population. So the problem is, and this was something that I had kind of discovered through different user testing sessions over the years and conversations with users who represented kind of the baby boomer and older population or demographic. And the problem is that we're really pushing towards accessibility in ways that when we think about the quote unquote older adult, that we're condescending oftentimes because we're trying to dumb things down, make it simple. There's lots of labels we put on this. And, you know, I've been guilty of this. And one thing that I realized through trying to figure out this problem, this was kind of through, hey, let's build a content strategy that appeals to this demographic. And then hearing from them, well, I need more information. And then giving them more information and them saying, well, it's too much information. I need things, you know, simplified. So I have been in many discussions where it's like, hey, we're not designing for people who are broken, because that was what I was thinking, was like, hey, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with these users? And it was us. It was the content that we were building a strategy around that really said, hey, these people are broken. There's something wrong with them. And not realizing the fact that these folks have been using tech longer than most of us have. So what that led me to was some research coming out of MIT and Stanford. And that's that older users really want experiences that are frictionless, but that are also sophisticated and give them you know, the ability to have flexibility and control over that experience. They don't want what I've kind of labeled as senior mode. You know, that real simple, large font, basic experience that we see on many sites and experiences that are trying to reach this audience. So my take here is that we should stop giving them the large text dumbed down copy treatment. In the background here is a site called GoGo Grandparent, which is a perfect example of the things that we should not be doing and the content patterns that we should not be implementing. And when it comes down to our content, I think a great way to think about this is to consider how the New York Times approaches the way that they phrase things. And they speak intelligently, they speak concisely and to the point, and steer clear of content that is the so-called C-spot run, very dumbed down, basic. Again, a lesson that I learned is that clarity doesn't equal simplicity. They're two very different things. And one more added bonus is that when we design for older adults, and when we look at the big, beautiful bucket of accessibility in general, accessibility for all, it raises the experience for everyone. And this is a quote from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit, that when you design for accessibility first, you create products that benefit all users, not just those with impairments. And this is what they call the curb cut effect, which if you've ever been on a walk in a city or suburban area where the curb cuts away when you cross through the intersection, it was intended for those with impairments, but hey, it benefits all of us. It actually makes that experience easier to transition from one side of the block to the other. So with that said, that's my take. If I'm exploring this, as I said, and so if you have any questions or are looking for resources, I'm starting to build some of those things. You can reach me at this email address, or download a PDF that I've been putting together to help us identify age biases in our content work. So thanks.
All right, Bryan, well done. Thank you for sharing your spicy take. We have a lot of people actually agreeing with you in the comments. So um maybe your spicy take is actually a bit more mild, which actually might be a good thing. But we do have some questions coming through. So Catherine says, do you have any research data that supports her theory that older populations need more versus younger digital natives who have perpetuated the misperception that people don't read? And are there any stats about that?
Yeah, I'd have to probably connect with you offline to give you some specifics. Off the top of my head, I don't have anything that I can mention in detail, but what I would say is that the research that I've gone through, plus I've been doing work here locally in the world's largest retirement community with folks to really get a sense for like what that looks like. And what I've found through just my anecdotal experience that's corroborated by the research is that they do want more information, but they want it in a way that makes sense to them in the step-by-step process that they're going through in that experience. So it has to be context relevant. And they do want to understand at a base level what they're being asked to do. And once they have clarity around that, then there's, okay, that makes sense to me. And I have enough information to make that decision. But if I do have a question, I know that there's a resource at hand here through this experience that I can reference. So I think that that's really the thing is it's not so much a question of do we have enough content or do we not? But it's really thinking about what do they need in that moment, which quite frankly isn't really any different than how we would approach designing the content for any user. But we have to just be thinking about it in the way that we're not dumbing it down or trying to oversimplify what that content is conveying.
Yeah, that's fair enough. In fact, Rebecca just said in the chat that everything you've mentioned sounds relevant to all users. So,
Yeah,
which you just
exactly.
mentioned. So, yeah. So Andy has an interesting question here, which is, this is great. How is this controversial? So, what's the controversial part of this?
Yeah. I think the controversy is that we are not really proactively thinking about this. And like I said, this is a huge demographic shift that's happening right now. And most executive leadership teams, and I've been in these conversations where they're saying we need to focus on Gen Z. Forget our older users. And older users get lumped in this bucket of 50 and older. I can tell you that a 55-year-old has a very different life stage that they're in than a 65-year-old. And that 65-year-old is in a very different life stage than a 75-year-old, and so on and so forth. And so that's the big thing is saying, look, we've got to look at this through a different perspective of how do we understand what the needs are for these very complex groups of people that are at different life stages. And it's not about age, it's about the actual psychographics, not demographics, but psychographics of where they're at in their life and what they're trying to pursue. It's a very complicated topic, but it's fascinating to me. But I think that that's really the sticking point is maybe not so much controversy, but something that's being glossed over to a very high degree.
I think it's a great point, and it's also interesting to think about the fact that the level of familiarity with technology is obviously going to be different now with seniors as it was 25 years ago,
Yeah.
because we've been using sort of so much technology around for a long time. So that's a great take. So Bryan, thank you so much for this take. I think
Yeah,
you've gotten a lot
thanks.
of people agreeing with you. So well done. All
Cool.
right. So we're gonna keep going now. We're making good progress with our spicy takes. Um for some reason this is not letting me share right now. Okay, so here we go. So now we're gonna go to our next take, which is Audrey Ross, senior content designer at Skylight. And Audrey's take is stop trying to make content first design happen. So Audrey, take it away.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Replace share. All right. All right. So, hey, everyone. I am Audrey. As Patrick just said, my pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a senior content designer at Skylight working with government digital services, but I am also a veteran giver of spicy takes. Just one example I wanted to include was this very old picture from high school when I wore suits weekly at speech and debate tournaments, which will surprise no one who knows me. So I was ready when Patrick made the call for spicy takes. And as he just mentioned, the take that got me this slot was stop trying to make content first happen, which is already probably pretty spicy as it is, but the heat really got kicked up a notch because the book Content First Design launched very recently. Patrick even featured it in the dash, saying content first design is no longer optional when you knew I was doing this talk. But in all seriousness, I want to be clear before I start that I'm not about to start some beef, and these 5 minutes should by no means discourage you from supporting small presses, buying Sarah Johnson's new book, because really, the methods of content first design are not inherently bad, or as you'll see, inherently at odds with the things that I'm going to be talking about today. We agree, having more collaboration early is great, not letting words be the last thing that we think of, which is also where we're starting today. Because we, of all people, should know that the words we use matter, which means that how we describe our work and our methods is also more than mere semantics. It matters for how others view our work and how we view our work too. And I don't believe that the framing of content first is helping us as a discipline. Many of the actual tactics in association with content first aren't bad. It's more about the positioning and perceptions we create when we talk about content first. And I don't think that those perceptions and positioning is moving us where we really want to go. Because what is the end goal really of all of these strategies to get content into the workflow at the right times? Is it really about having content first, which can unintentionally imply like it's first and then done, when really we're throughout the whole process and others are too? And what do we really want to have first? Maybe it's more about collaboration or getting everyone in their best place to contribute. So if content first isn't really the best description of our goals and method, what is? I think our real goal is more about having context first, about each person and function having the context they need to deliver their best. Which true, content is an important part of that context for product design, engineers, and others, but content is not the only context. We need context outside of ourselves too, so we can best deliver at the start. We need engineering input on what's technically feasible, product design input on existing interaction patterns, and more than what I can fit in a 5-minute talk. But each team member is more than welcome to actually play with these questions and solutions alongside content at the beginning. A product designer messing around with sketches and wireframes while you define content requirements is not actually at odds. In fact, I think that when you can do that from a place of trust and then come together for a solution, that you create even stronger results, especially if you're not vying for your spot to be first in the process, or it doesn't feel that way because of the words we use. But talks about processes and methods like content first can make it seem like there are these really clear handoff points. But in reality, I think product design and product development is really less like a relay race and more like a puzzle, working on a puzzle as a team with everyone involved with their perspective, working on the problem together. And yes, there are team puzzle competitions apparently. But as I look around at the industry, I fear that in our hard-won effort to get a seat at the table, we've also started to try and make it our table, or at least that it can seem that way with the words we use. And we've been so desperate to show that we don't just belong, but that we matter and we have impact and value. And those vibes, combined with words like content first, really make it sound like we want to be in this position at the head of the table rather than part of a fellowship. But as we talked about, we are not the holders of context. We're not the only thing needed to start work well. We need the fellowship. And now that we've gotten a seat at the table, we shouldn't be about focusing on using that position to create what seems like gates and barriers. We should be pulling up chairs, lifting up other voices too, and making sure that no one feels the same way we have before, of being misunderstood or left out of important conversations, asked to just deliver on this thing that was already decided. Which is why we need to rethink content first as our lead framing. The words we use matter. And content first has a way of emphasizing division over connection, implying that it's a thing done before and not throughout the process. Because it's not about being first, it's about going together, all having the context we all need. So yes, of course I agree. We don't want to get pulled in last minute for button copy on a final design or review things halfway first and realize no one considered this user need. But trying to align everyone with content first is not the way to get there. Put context first, build together cross-functionally, and you'll be set up for better alignment, collaboration, and product success. Thank you.
All right, Audrey. Excellent. You've already been nominated for president in the chat. So I think there are some people who are very, very open to this concept. I am not one of those people because you called me out specifically in your presentation. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But we do have a question here, which is the problematic concept here is calling this content. Isn't it the content framing, not the first part, that needs to not happen? What do you think about that?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I definitely focused more on like the content emphasis, but as I mentioned, I also think when we say, even if we're talking about getting content first, like it's, do we really want to be first or do we want to emphasize involvement throughout? If we're starting to document a process, and which I love making processes and clear processes are great, but if you're putting content over here because it's like we need content first, so we're going to do content and then it like can make it harder to be like, oh, but actually I need to review and like actually let me help with this part too. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it's a little of
No,
both, I guess, would be the answer.
yeah, that's right. I think the job title change to context designer has also been proposed in the chat. But I think like a lot of what you're saying makes sense here. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back because there were a couple of questions slash statements. One comment, it's not really a question, but might be worth addressing is this person says, I get what you're saying, but I feel like there's a line between UX writing and content design, which of course is, an ongoing discussion. What do you think about that?
Gosh, that's a whole other talk.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
like
whole other webinar,
yeah, how do
Yeah.
we have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'd say, yeah, I think that, yeah, content first design. I mean, what we're talking about here as well is like content first design is primarily a methodology, right? And so that methodology could theoretically be applied by any role. Theoretically, it could even be applied by product designers. It's just, I mean, that would be cool. I think honestly, some of the methods. But so it's more of a methodology than like with specific titles and titles and what your role does is like, yeah, a whole other thing.
Yeah, okay. Where could this approach go wrong? Is there a downside to thinking in terms of context first? Because
Mm.
obviously, content first has it has a lot of support and I think there are advantages to that. Where could the context first model go bad?
Yeah. I almost included something about risks, but I just only had so much time. Because I think there is a risk. I think that honestly, one of the reasons why content first is so appealing is because it technically does reduce some risk
Hmm.
because it theoretically introduces more control. Or at least what we feel like is more control into us and what we want to do. And so, but from my perspective, I feel like when you're trying to involve more people and more ways of working in the process, the risk goes up, but so do the benefits because I want to be working in a way that is involving other people, even if it feels maybe more difficult and risky sometimes.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right, we've got a good question here. So the objective of content first, in my mind, is to show that content needs to happen from the start, in response to how it's felt impossible to convey this successfully in other ways. I agree with your point, but it would be easy to leave us out of context first as well. What approach do you think would do better to get us in early?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, I mean, part of it is the one thing to remember is that also, when it comes to positioning or framing or perceptions, it is always going to depend on your audience. And so you're going to know like what term is going to resonate with whoever you're trying to pitch to or get involved. But I think when you're framing it in the more inclusive, overarching way, and you're saying like, hey, we all need the context we need to get started on this work, then that opens up the conversation and opens more doors. So like if you are left out, then you're saying like, hey, like what about this context? I thought we all agreed like we needed context to do the work, and you're missing this important information you need for what you're trying to do. That said, again, I think there are a lot of specific methodologies within content first that can still be applied with what I'm saying. I'm not like throw it all out. But that framing, I think, opens doors for more conversations.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. This isn't a question, but more of a statement in the chat. Maybe it's less that content first is wrong, and it's more that we need to avoid content last, and all elements of the design should be equal and iterative. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's another good way to look at it, that we've sort of shifted. Yeah, we've gone like the other way, right? Like we're like, don't let us be last, so we gotta be first. There's some last is first is last thing out there I could probably say, but like let's not. So we went maybe too far the other way. So I could see that as well.
Interesting. All right, Audrey, fantastic defense. Thank you so much. And we are now going to move on to our next take. And I'm interested to see the responses to this one. But our next take is from Kate, VP of Content Design at SAP, Kate Agena. Kate, I've never actually pronounced your last name, so please tell me if I just pronounced that completely wrong.
It's Agena.
Agena. I'm so sorry. I'm just
so you know that it's okay. I'm not picky about it.
Okay. You know that thing where you see someone's name and then you never actually pronounce it? I should have asked you beforehand, so I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Kate's take today is bring back click here, which might actually be a little bit controversial. So Kate, take it away.
Sure. All right. Okay, it's maybe not quite as spicy as Patrick is suggesting, because it's not click here, it's just click. But I'll get into that. Okay, so my spicy take is, I think maybe, just maybe, after all these years, it's okay that we can say click, whether we mean a mouse click, a tap on a device, or activation via keyboard press or enter key from the screen reader. So this is maybe the most half-baked of all of these, so I'm hoping it's controversial because I'm hoping to get some feedback from people. First of all, I think we can all agree that we generally want to avoid talking about the UI so explicitly. It just shouldn't be necessary. It goes against the kind of experience that we want to create, and it leads to all kinds of issues with translation, but sometimes it is unavoidable. And so this is a situation that I'm in right now. I am doing walk-me's, and they are really like task walkthroughs. So we are going step by step through a task, and as much as we try to write our way around it, we sometimes have to say, click on something. So what do? We get to this situation, we have to write patterns, because my team is tasked not only with doing these walkthroughs, but establishing patterns for all future walk-me's in SAP. And so we went to the style guide. We're all new to the company. So you know how it is when you come into a company and you see all the style guides and they're all over the place and they all disagree on everything. Well, there's a big style guide, and what it says in the big style guide is that when you are instructing users to activate a button, you use the word choose. And everyone on my team didn't like that. Why? Because we're on Camp Select. You know, if you go through all of the style guides, all the big ones out there, they're going to say use select. Why? It's device agnostic. You don't have to worry about people who are using screen readers. It's the most inclusive option. However, they were using select for checkboxes. They were using choose for menus. They were using choose for buttons. It was just all over the place. And we wanted to avoid making changes to the style guide unless absolutely necessary. So we went to the second most important style guide, or maybe the most important style guide, which is our actual design system UI guidelines. And they don't actually explicitly say what to do in this case. So we went to the owner of those guidelines, and she said she also hated choose for clicking a button, and she was using click. And I was all ready to argue for select. And so I asked for the history of it. And she said they'd gone through a whole decision-making process to side with click. And they'd worked with the accessibility team, and they talked to people who were using screen readers, and they gave them multiple different options, multiple different situations. And in each case, each of the people who were in various ways not clicking a mouse said that they preferred click because they said it was the clearest. That's what the verb is for selecting, activating a button. And that kind of blew my mind. So I thought about it for a while, and I ended up maybe being in camp click. So what's the difference between choose and select? We say we want select for selecting a button, but we maybe want choose for a menu. Are select and choose really that different in meaning? I think not super different. And so I played with it for a while, and I felt like, what's the most natural? If our users are telling us it's the most natural to use click. So to sum it up a little bit, my argument is definitely not that we don't need to care about our users' experience and context. So my argument is not, let's stop worrying about whether they're using a screen reader, whether they're on a device, like a mobile device, or they're on a desktop computer. But my argument is that the word click now has actually transcended the narrow action of clicking a mouse. So to start with, most of us now use a trackpad more than we use a mouse. When touchscreens were new, the term tap was maybe useful because there wasn't that tactile click that there is on a mouse or a trackpad. But, everybody's used to using a phone now. I think that everybody knows how to activate something on a phone, whether you call it a tap or a click. And so I'm wondering, outside the world of tech writers and writers for tech, would people be offended by hearing click if they're on their phone? So at least in our case, the inclusivity issue didn't seem to be an issue based on the people that we were caring about. And so just as we all claim to hang up our telephones when we click a little red button, tap a little red button, I think that we can say click. So that's my hot take. My takeaways were question the rules, seek out and listen for feedback. You don't have to die on every hill because this was kind of where it all started, and to just go with what feels most natural. So I'm excited to hear what you all say, because this is not I'm not fully ready to die on this hill yet either.
Excellent. Thanks, Kat. I actually think people would be more offended by people mispronouncing their surnames rather than seeing the word click. But we've got some interesting comments in the chat. One is that we should move to YouTube language and use the word smash when referring to click or press. So,
Smash the enter button.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know how that would actually go. But one question, have you done any testing on this issue specifically, and what's the general consensus of the user base?
Yeah, so the only testing that has been done so far, which we are going to do further testing before we decide on any rule one way or the other. The testing so far, I think, has been what my the Fiori guidelines person had said, which was they talked to about 4 people, all internal, who work on the accessibility team, but who actually do use screen readers or are using some other way of activating buttons rather than clicking a mouse.
Yeah. There's another question here, which is, have you tested this in context across various audiences, which that addresses.
Right.
But so I guess we'll have to wait and see if there's going to be a stronger reaction. There is a question here about cognitive accessibility. And I suppose it's more of a comment, which is that we need to think about people with anxiety or focus impairments. Too many commands or commands that are too strong can be off-putting. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd like to hear more and maybe do some testing on that with this particular example. In terms of like the cognitive load of it, I think in a lot of ways, what we do when we get so picky about words because of accessibility or because of, you know, some other issue is that we actually add to the cognitive load, because I think most people think of, you know, clicking a button as clicking a button. And so if we're, you know, playing around with, okay, in this particular case, we're going to use select. And in this particular case, we're going to use choose. And in this particular case, we're using, you know, whatever. I think that maybe if we just have one word, or we have, you know, we have click if it's on desktop, but then if you have a mobile native option, you put tap. Are we adding too many words? And that's actually increasing the cognitive load instead of using the most simplest verb for it, which I think is click.
Yeah, interesting. And that sort of addresses another question, which is how does this jive with accessibility and SEO, which is an interesting point.
Yeah.
I mean, one question here is, how do you get around users thinking that you're dated when you use the word click? I mean, it's an interesting one. I don't know if you've seen this trend, but there are these things on social media with people, they'll have a Gen Z person and they'll have like a millennial, and they'll ask them like, how do you hang up a phone? The millennials always go like this, and the Gen Z is always
Right.
like, just press exit on the smartphone. So it's kind of that as time, you know, moves on, all of these assumptions about how we interact with technology changes. How do you get around that
Yeah.
perception that you're, you know, older or just out of touch?
Yeah, you know what I think would be really interesting to do would be some testing where you, without putting the options, you know, you have a user walking through a thing and have them say what they're doing, so that they have to come up with the word for the click, and see with different ages what they come up with, to see if, you know, do younger people also think of it as a click, or is that an aged, dated thing? Yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
good question. I think that would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kate, thank you so much for your hot take and your defense. Some really great, really great perspectives there. All right, we're going to move into our final take here, which is from Victor from Meta. And Victor is going to talk about the fact that content design mainly has itself to blame for what it perceives to be the main problems facing it. So, Victor, take it away.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Victor Beigelman. I'm a content design manager in the Gen AI space at Meta. And as Patrick said, my take is that content design's barrier to further growth and influence is self-created. And so what I mean by that is that it's my observation that collectively as a practice, we can fall victim to spending too much time doing things like acting like the language police, expressing loud opinions on non-essential work, fuming that we're not brought in earlier into the design and product process, missing the opportunity to bring partners on the journey, and complaining about pay equity with other disciplines. And you can start to see this manifest if you are seeing or hearing or personally feeling, as I often have, sentiments like, well, it follows the style guide as a basis for the decision that you're making or the argument that you're making, worrying and grousing that you are not a content vending machine when people are coming to you to basically just fill in a blank, having loud opinions about the Oxford comma, Oxford comma, Oxford comma, Oxford comma, regardless of what side you fall on. It represents having a strong opinion on something that a lot of our product peers just might not think about or care about, to be totally honest. It's espousing opinions like, well, this negative thing might not have happened if I was there at kickoff and I told you so attitude, using, well, other content designers agree as, again, as a basis for the argument that you're making. And finally, of course, we should be making as much as a product design partner. This is a pretty simple chart. You can see time on one axis, growth and influence on the other. I think obviously what I'm trying to articulate here is that we can trip ourselves up on a natural growth path when we get too tied to sentiments like this. So what's the solution? I think there's a lot of energy that goes into those kinds of sentiments. And my view is that it would be better for us as a discipline if we took that energy and put it more towards things like showing our process, demonstrating unique value as content designers, leveraging data, frameworks, and visual storytelling to demonstrate arguments again, or decisions, or content solutions, forging new ground through our language expertise, for example, on large language model design, interactive storytelling, AR and VR voice experiences, all these really interesting and creative and crazy and frankly really fuzzy new technologies that are coming online. And then finally, spiritually, just shedding the inferiority complex to focus on the work. And so some ways that this might manifest in your day-to-day would be sentiments like saying, here's the string you need along with the system it's a part of. So I'm not just filling in the blank, but I am giving you the thing you asked for, that little nugget, couched in a wider solution that demonstrates what I'm capable of beyond just words. It's having conversations about trade-offs. So like going out with this content or the solution that in your view is bad or like wouldn't be beneficial to the user or your team or your company, having a conversation that's not just no, but well, if it can't be this or if it has to be this, this is what we're going to have to sacrifice. There's also, again, things saying things like, here's a wireframe of the ideal information architecture based on user goals. So even if you don't see yourself as having particularly strong visual chops as a designer, at least using some sort of like visual tools to articulate the solutions that you have beyond just docs and words and things of that nature. It's being able to say when someone comes to you with like, well, did you try this? Or did you think of this? Because of course, everyone else also knows how to use words to some extent and considers themselves a writer. You can say, well, we explored that, but we went against it because, instead of just dismissing it out of hand. Obviously doing things like grounding your solutions in user research and data. And then again, this is sort of speaking to the idea of new ground for something like voice interaction, saying like, well, this needs a whole different set of principles than text because ... And that's something that potentially a content designer could uniquely bring to the conversation. So that's my take. And there's a nice content vending machine for you. And here's where you can find me if you would like to continue the conversation elsewhere. Substack, LinkedIn, there's my website. Really curious your thoughts. Thanks.
All right, Victor, thank you for that. There's some interesting comment in what's ironic about this is that a lot of the chat has descended into debates about the Oxford comma. But some good points here. So I think one point here is about the demonstrating value. So obviously people are really like, this is a difficult thing for people to do. And so how I know you've already mentioned, some ways people can do that, but in terms of demonstrating value, what are some things that people can do to make sure that that's happening?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I wouldn't have like brought this forth had I not experienced a lot of this for myself, right? So I think for what it's worth, some of the things that have been useful for me that I did touch on a little bit is just trying to really like speak the language of my product partners, which doesn't mean I need to learn how to code, doesn't mean I need to be like a world-class visual designer, doesn't mean like I need to have like an academic background in research. It's just like understanding how my partners come to the same set of problems that like I have been hired and brought in to solve as well, and couching like my content solutions in the language of a given audience that I'm trying to get like on board with me. And then another one really is like I actually, I try not to chase too much from thing to thing to thing because like there are some new technologies that are just fads and totally like vaporware, like crypto. And then there are others like AI, where like we're like, is this a thing? Is this real? Feels like it is. And so these are things that like I'm really interested in getting into early on, where like it just feels like because our core skills are writing and editing, we should get in there like really, really quickly and provide takes on like how we should be designing and like welcoming people into these like really strange and crazy new spaces with like the expertise that we uniquely have, which is like being clear, being consistent, being direct about like what this means for you and like how you can get the best out of it. I think a lot of it's interesting and surprising almost that like a lot of uh, disciplines and like teams struggle even to like it's just like here's the new shiny thing, you should do it because it's new and it's shiny, not because this is actually how it can bring value to you. So it's like chasing new technologies and opportunities to like bring value to the team, to the company, to people that you build your products for, and like kind of being first to that conversation, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. One really quick question before we vote. A lot of the inability to show value is systemic and an organizational issue. Barriers are a real thing. When do you know it's time to just leave?
Wow. Great question. I think it's a gut feeling. You know, you have to give yourself the honest shot to like bring your partners on board and understand, like help them understand what your value is. But I have been there, and it can be very tiring to feel like you're justifying your value and like your very like being in a given context over and over and over again. So I think once you've like given yourself a maybe, you know, some leeway to say like this is what I'm going to try to do, these are the people I'm going to talk to, and this is what I'm going to try to deliver before I like wash my hands of it. Just like draw the line in the sand for yourself and be honest when you know you've crossed it.
Fair enough. All right, Victor, thank you for that hot take. And now, with our last few minutes, we're going to vote. So I'm going to start a poll, and what I want everyone to do is to start voting. But when you vote, don't just think about who had the best take, but who defended their take the most. So I'm actually not sure if everyone can see the results in real time, or only I can. Can someone let me know if they can see the results as well? Or is it just me? Okay, so it might just be just me. And I got to tell you right now, we have a clear winner. We have a very clear winner. Um, so I'll just give everyone just a few more seconds to vote. We've got 71% of people who have voted so far. So I'll just make sure that we've just got a few, just our last people coming in. But I got to tell you, it's a pretty far and away winner here. All right, we've got about 15 people left. I don't know who's left, but it doesn't matter because whoever, even with these last votes, I can tell you who has the winner. So the hottest take goes to Audrey for Stop Trying to Make Content First, Design Happen. So this was the hottest take of the day, and the winner of the Spicy Take Summit. Audrey, you walked away with 53% of the vote. So you have a majority here. Would you like to say a few words about your winning take?
Oh man. Thanks everyone. I guess I feel like I should give a shout out to my high school speech and debate coach since that suit keeps coming up. I got more. Oh, thanks everyone. Yeah, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Think about context first, but still support small presses and all the other things. So thanks
Awesome.
everyone.
So Audrey will win some UXCC credit for her time and to put towards learning a new topic. And I just want to thank everyone before we finish off today. So Francis, Bryan, Audrey, Kate, and Victor, thank you so much for participating today. I think that we've all, had a great discussion, and there's been a lot of new perspectives, hopefully, for people to walk away with. So, and the chat itself has been just as spicy as the takes. So I think this has been a lot of fun. So thank you everyone for coming. I think this has been really cool. And yeah, again, if you have any questions, comments, or anything, please feel free to reach out to us, info@uxcontent.com. You can email us, let us know, connect with everyone on LinkedIn, and we'll post a follow-up as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. We ended just on time. So yeah, have a great rest of your day, and see you all soon.